And I wanted to welcome everyone today. We have an exciting meeting, a lot going on. So just a reminder to the presenters, if you could try and keep your presentation to 10 minutes, that would be fantastic. We're going to start out with the town of Poughkeepsie. Kristen Taylor is going to present, and then we'll hear from Dutchess County and then the city of Beacon. After that, Caroline is going to lead us through emissions forecasting. And lastly, I'll talk a little bit about stakeholder engagement as well as questions that have come up in the last couple of weeks or month. So thank you all in advance for presenting and for your attention and for your support of CAPI. So with that, I will turn it over to Kristen.
Great, thank you.
Sure, you should be able to share your screen.
Just let me know, confirm that you can see it.
Yes.
Okay.
You can see it, although it's, yeah, perfect.
The presenter view always throws me off a little bit. Okay, so yeah, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to have us be a part of this initiative. I'm Kristen Taylor. I'm a senior planner in the planning department. Here today, we also have my direct boss, Mike Welty, our director of municipal development. And we also, of course, have representation from our Climate Smart Task Force, Susan Carnes-Hecht, who is our chair of our Climate Smart Task Force. And I believe Rich Levine is also on as a member. Our Climate Smart Task Force is made up of volunteers here at the town. And I sort of serve as the staff liaison for the work that goes on between Climate Smart Task Force and staff here. So just a quick little background about the town. We were established in 1788. We have a population of approximately 45,000 residents, and that's from 2020. Acreage, or I'm sorry, mileage, square miles are 31.2. We're home to a number of colleges, school districts, fire districts, 20 parks, 4 private schools, 16 malls, plazas. The colleges include Dutchess County Community College, Vassar College, Marist College. And then I have some more technical numbers I can throw at you about infrastructure a little later on. But of course, also home to a myriad of natural, cultural, agricultural, and recreational resources. And I believe I pulled this map straight out of our comp plan or our NRI. But just to give you a general sense of where we are and what we cover, we're a pretty sizable municipality. In 2018, the town adopted the pledge to become a climate smart community. At that point, Susan whipped us all into shape, and we pulled together a volunteer climate smart task force, and that we hit the ground running around July 2019. About 2 years later, to the month exactly, we were able to submit for bronze climate smart certification review, and ultimately found out in September that year that we had achieved the bronze level certification. And then, of course, like I said, Susan kept us going. There's no time to slow down. We kept the foot on the gas, and we've continued to build upon the work that was done for that certification, and are working towards silver. We also, just at a slightly different track, but I'm also a part of, but the Climate Smart Task Force is also a part of. We worked to update our comprehensive plan. It hadn't been updated in about 10 plus years, and it included sustainability elements, and it was adopted in October 2021. Those sustainability elements sort of circled or encompassed those 4 E's that are listed: economy, equity, environment, and energy. And then we also have been busy. We just completed a natural resources inventory and an open space plan, looking at things like regulatory tools, such as updating our zoning to preserve the natural and open space within our community. So like everyone else, we have utilized as best we can a baseline year for data in 2019. We were able to locate some data for buildings and facilities, streetlights, vehicle fleet, employee commute, water and wastewater treatment facilities. We did not provide records for this report that, we do not have a transit fleet, that the town is in charge of electric power production or solid waste facilities. We do not have an active landfill in our community that the town is responsible for. So, we did have to get a little bit creative, but again, more on that as we go. So jumping right in, I did actually keep these in order from the greatest percentage to the least percentage. So greatest impact to the lowest impact. Vehicle fleet turned out to be our greatest impact. In 2019, we actually completed a town-wide vehicle fleet inventory, was ultimately submitted as part of that 2021 Climate Smart certification review. And the data that we were able to collect didn't actually at that time include the the fuel use calculation. It took quite a bit of time, believe it or not, to obtain the list of department vehicles for each of those departments that are here at the town, and there are quite a few. And so, again, we did some estimating based on we were able to track down through the comptroller's office how much fuel use was purchased during 2019. And then because we had the list of vehicles, we were able to further break that down, gas vehicles versus diesel vehicles, and calculate the percentage, and then therefore calculate the respective gallons of fuel use. So we got a little bit creative, but ultimately I think this is a fair representation of the 145 vehicles that we had on that roster for 2019. Next up, we had water and wastewater at 872 metric tons. We have the water treatment facility. It's a joint partnership. And I know the city of Poughkeepsie had touched on this when they presented. I actually contacted the person in charge of the facility. He pulled the information for 2019 for me and disclosed that the town had been responsible for 52% of the emissions or use for that year. So then we just further did the math, broke it down. So that was 479 metric tons for that particular facility. Wastewater treatment facility, town only, we were able to calculate 219 metric tons. Our sewer pump stations, through many conversations with our sewer department head, I was able to learn that we have about 41 pump stations throughout the town, reluctantly taking on more as projects come online, but that could be a whole separate presentation, so I won't go further into that. Water pump stations, we have about 9. We also have some backup generation, which is represented by that sewer bar graph, or should I say non-existent graph line. It was so minute compared to the other emissions, so it's not really coming through on this graph. And there are also minimal of those. I think there were only about 6 inputs for that data component. So it just really wasn't we would like to delve more into that, why there was some backup for some facilities and perhaps not others. And we just sort of ran out of time for continuing to keep that conversation going. Although I think our department head for the sewer department has taken enough of my calls, and I think I've reached my quota for 2023. So for buildings and facilities, we're at 13% of our pie chart representation, 360 metric tons. As you could imagine, the police department and highway department make up a significant component of that.
I know,
Apparently, that just tends to make sense.
Javier definitely pushed for us to do
Hi
the
guys,
fucking
sorry.
resolution after
Just
that,
a heads
right?
up, if you could
That's
please
what
mute
I was under
yourself,
the
that would be
impression.
great.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
That's okay. It happens all the time. It keeps things interesting. We have a year-round pretty high usage. Same for the highway department. If you think about it, those facilities are again being utilized year-round. So again, that bar graph representation, and those tend to stick out within the confines of that town miscellaneous things like the town senior center. Those are, things like town hall buildings and facilities like town hall and the senior center building. Our parks, if they have the, restrooms that they offer. And so that's kind of the breakdown there. We had hoped to get a little bit more data information or breakdown for some of those facilities, like our sewer department had previously been included in this, but we pulled them out and put them into water and wastewater. And there were some items listed in their department that I, would have liked to further delved into, but we just didn't get there. Employee commute data, again, had to get a little bit creative. The police department makes up most of the town staff, or half of the town staff, I should say, 102 employees approximately. And this is 11% of the pie chart. Forgive me, I didn't include the pie chart on this slide because this was a significant chart to show. And so with 16 town departments, 15 of them are less than 29 metric tons. Not that that's not important or irrelevant, but the police department actually itself produces 181 metric tons. We did have to get creative with the data that we had for average annual vehicle miles traveled. We took an average of the rest of the employee commute data we were able to receive through my persistence and harassing the department heads for employee commute data, and there was some sensitivity with the town police department. So we just decided to go this route after about a month and a half, 2 months of not being able to achieve what we were hoping for from the police department. And that's fair, we understand. So we took that average and applied it to the police department at 102 staff members, and we assumed 60-40 passenger to light duty vehicles. And that's ultimately how we calculated the emissions. So the employee commute data also factors in not just traveling to work, but the mileage that would be used for returning home from work. We felt that was important to paint a complete picture for employee commute. So the numbers might be a little bit elevated. That said, I do think that even if they were all scaled up, it's an accurate representation of which departments are creating the most impact in terms of emissions. And again, it's really based on department size. And again, water, sewer, our police department, building department, they are our larger departments, so it makes sense. Streetlights, we have 2 consolidated lighting districts. Highway department is also in charge of some of the lighting. So that is our smallest pie chart component at 161 metric tons. Not much else to say there. Would have liked to have found out a little bit more detail, but we just didn't get there. And then in terms of challenges, takeaways, learnings, CAPI education. So from my perspective as a town staffer and really the lead on pulling a lot of this data and the communication that was going on, I found myself educating consistently, and that's fine, that's fair. But I think that perhaps we could have done a little bit better of a job of educating, maybe even at the department head level, what was coming down the line in terms of data requests. And maybe that would have helped with some of the time constraints, and everything sort of feeds into timing. There's also this like transparency and delivery that needed to happen consistently. Again, this is my perspective and my experience through this process for the last 6 months. Just not throwing departments under the bus. This is a town initiative and it's backed by our town board. And just really making that clear that this is just to get a baseline of where we're at, what is the town doing, and go from there. Data understanding, records management. In some instances, the data was relatively easy to obtain. In others, it was almost impossible. And took a lot of persistence. Communities, municipalities in particular, are always interested in budgets and bottom lines. And so it was just interesting to, as a staffer, in some instances find that maybe some of these things were not being tracked as carefully, and really we could probably do a better job at that. And again, that's not saying it doesn't exist with a little bit of digging, but again, we were working with 2019 data, or at least trying to. But I think that there might be some area to improve in that way. So we did our best with the data gaps that we had, and that perhaps there was some inconsistent representation between pie charts and percentages, and we did our best to rectify again with the data we were able to obtain. Again, assumptions and estimations were required, but in talks with Kale and of course Mary, Caroline, I think we got there in terms of a good inventory baseline. And all of these items sort of fed into time constraints. I think if we had just had a little bit more ramping up time to set up the inventory component or data polls, we probably could have obtained a little bit more information, but ultimately, I think the town is pretty happy with where we were able to land. I'd just like to say again, thank you to Susan, our chair of the Climate Smart Task Force. Rich, since you're on and participating, thank you. The rest of our Climate Smart Task Force, again, all volunteers, incredible individuals volunteering their time to on this initiative, but others as well within the town supervisor, Jay Beasley, Hudson Valley Regional Council, ICLEI, and of course, all of the town departments that I bothered over the past 8 months. The department heads, in particular with the sewer, water departments, police department, comptroller's office, they were really outstanding. And the auto department deserves a shout out just because I had previously bothered them for months at a time to collect that inventory data. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I know that you had some particular challenges with this, so I really appreciate all the hard work that went into this inventory. So great job. And I think we're going to hold questions till the end, just given our tight schedule today. So we'll move over to Dutchess County, and we'll hear next from Kelsey West.
Hi, everyone. I'm just getting my screen sharing all set here. And I, of course, I'm not seeing my presentation. Here we are.
Okay, great.
Sorry about that. Thanks for your patience. Okay, does everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kelsey West, and I'm an environmental educator with Dutchess Cornell Cooperative Extension. And I'm joined here today by the other CAPI members of our team. I'm Devin Regalino, who is a senior GIS planner for Dutchess County Planning Department, and also Carolyn Clocker, who is our energy and environment program leader at CCE. So we'll just jump right into it. Dutchess County covers 801.6 square miles and includes 20 square miles of the Hudson River. Dutchess County is located on the ancestral lands of the Wappinger, Mohican, and Munsee peoples, collectively known as the Lenni Lenape. Post-European settlement in 1683, Dutchess County was established as one of the 12 original colonies of New York State. And its early history was primarily agricultural, but since obviously has developed to include large residential areas. At the 2020 census, the population was around 295,000. And most of the county's residents live along the Hudson River, Route 9, Route 44, and Route 55 corridors, or also in pockets of more dense settlements, such as village hamlets. Interesting to me was that approximately 75% of the population of the county lives in the southwestern region. That was a fun fact. As far as past or related, kind of climate relevant projects, Dutchess County is a bronze certified climate smart community since 2019. And the county is also actively working towards achieving silver certification at this time. In addition to that, the county is also a designated NYSERDA clean energy community. So like all of our cohorts, we used a baseline year of 2019 for this inventory. We included scope 1, which covered our solid waste facilities, streetlights and traffic signals, the transit fleet and the vehicle fleet. Scope 2 covered buildings and facilities, and we also included employee commute and information, which is a scope 3 sector. There were several components that weren't included. And the county just didn't have jurisdictional control over these places. So rented office spaces were not included. The community college, Dutchess County Community College, was not included, as the energy usage is managed by the campus. Similarly, Park Stadium is county owned, but energy usage is managed by a contracted stadium operator. And then the wastewater treatment facilities are managed by the Water and Wastewater Authority. They're an independent public benefit corporation with their own independent board. So they were not included in this inventory as well. And similarly for solid waste, the county's incinerator is operated by the Resource Recovery Agency. So it's, operational decisions are not necessarily managed by the county. So as for our inventory results, here is kind of a snapshot of our greenhouse gas emissions by sector. So we found ourselves with employee commute as the highest greenhouse gas emitter. And so that was at 37.8%, followed by vehicle fleet at 25.4%. Then our transit fleet at 21.5%. Buildings and facilities at 13.4%, and then streetlights and traffic signals, they're not really visible on this pie chart. They only contributed 3 CO2 equivalents to the grand total of 14,095 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So breaking this down a little further by sector, in order of our highest emitters, employee commute was first. So we have to take into account that a variety of assumptions were made and estimates to get this figure. We weren't able to implement a survey. So zip codes were used to estimate central GPS points to kind of calculate the distance between the employee's home and office commute. We also included 2 ways. But the number makes sense given that there are like 1,944 county employees, so it's quite a robust number. We also had to make some assumptions just based on like vehicle type. So we used the national default vehicle emissions data from 2019 to kind of make some assumptions about what type of vehicle, and also to kind of just understand vehicle type, I suppose. So following employee commute were the vehicle and transit fleets for the county. So for the vehicle fleet, we weren't actually able to get a full fleet inventory with a breakdown of vehicle type, but we were able to collect gas and diesel usage for all of the kind of respective departments. So we had to make some assumptions here, also based on the national default vehicle emissions data from 2019. So we also had to estimate vehicle miles traveled based on the vehicle type breakdown and average miles per gallon per vehicle type. So numbers there are maybe not super approximate because I know ClearPath needs vehicle miles traveled to calculate emissions, but otherwise it should be fairly accurate. So for the transit fleet, we did have a breakdown of vehicle type. There are 55 diesel buses of varying sizes, which accounts for all of the kind of diesel emissions. But we also found that the fleet uses gasoline consumption for service vehicles for the fleet. Moving on to buildings and facilities, making up 13.4% of our CO2 equivalents. This included electricity, natural gas, and residual fuel oil records for 44 county-owned and operated buildings. So it was, kind of a beast to get that information, thanks to DPW. Electricity seemed to be more of a factor than heating oil. We found that the top 3 kind of emissions producers were all electricity consumption, and they were the county jail complex, 60 Market Street, which houses the Department of Community and Family Services, and then 50 Market Street, which is the Dutchess County Courthouse. And then solid waste ended up being really complicated. I know this was an experience that many of the participating municipalities had. It only made up 1.75% of the county's emissions. But this is an estimate. kind of last minute, we had to make some assumptions based on the amount of waste county employees might produce while at work. So I used an EPA estimate that Americans produce 4.5 pounds of waste a day. And then given our records of part-time and full-time employees and how much time they would spend in the office per year, we kind of were able to find a percentage of the waste generated based on the total waste for the county. So it might not be the most accurate thing. It is something we would likely want to expand on in the future. But interestingly, originally we did include the county's incinerator managed by the RRA for these figures. And oops, sorry, if you look at the pie chart with the county incinerator included, it makes up 87% of the county's emissions, but it also produces 144 MMBTU of energy. So while this won't be included in the government operations inventory, it's definitely going to be something that we would be interested in exploring in a community-wide inventory in the future. So interesting results there. So of course, we had our fair share of challenges. We needed just a robust amount of data. The county owns and operates a lot of facilities. Fleet sizes are large. There are quite a few employees. Originally, we also didn't have a lot of success getting data from Central Hudson. So almost all the information that we included in the inventory came directly from DPW's records. In addition to that, of course, there are resource constraints, staff time and capacity for each department to procure this information. Was a big factor. But that being said, all of the info did pretty much exist. So it indicates that the county has really great bookkeeping. So that's great. And then some major takeaways and learnings. So with employee commute being the highest sector, there may be opportunities to lower emissions by offering incentives for employee carpooling or use of public transit. We are very interested in getting more accurate solid waste generation numbers. So, moving forward, there may be opportunities to work with the different carding services to keep better track of waste generation. And it also might be useful for the county to conduct a formal solid waste audit in the future. And then lastly, formalizing and regularly conducting a fleet inventory would be a really useful practice and would kind of help make some informed policies on fleet right sizing and the potential to electrify in the future. And so lastly, big thank yous, of course, to Devin Rigalino and Jen Kukuza of the Dutchess County Planning Department, who kind of coordinated all of the data gathering, and I'm sure that was a beast, so thank you. Bob Balkind, the Dutchess County Commissioner of DPW, for providing so much information. Carrie Russell, the Dutchess County Commissioner, or Deputy Commissioner of Solid Waste, for her help in collecting data. And of course, Mary and all the folks at HVRC, thank you for your guidance and your patience in answering so many of our questions, along with, of course, Kale, Caroline, Hannah, and others from ICLEI as well for your guidance through this process.
Thanks, Kelsey. That was fabulous. And I hope that I hope you can take a big sigh of relief now. I know you had a lot of challenges and interesting questions and issues come up. So I appreciate all the hard work from you and the team.
Thanks, Mary.
Yeah, and so now we'll move on to Ben Swanson and Eleanor Peck from the City of Beacon.
Good morning, everyone. You can see the presentation and hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, as Mary said, I'm Ben Swanson. I work as Secretary to the Mayor for the City of Beacon. I've been working in Beacon for about 2 years. This is my first time going through the CAPI process, but it's not Beacon's first time, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. I'm pleased to be joined by Eleanor Peck today, who is our former Climate Smart Coordinator. You all know her as working for Mid-Hudson Clean Energy Communities as a program manager. She's also a volunteer for our CAC. She's been a great help in this process, and I'm happy to have her helping me today. Our current Climate Smart Coordinator, Faye, unfortunately couldn't make it today. She might be listening in. Otherwise, she'll be watching the recording later, but she was a great help as well. And with that, I guess we can kick it off. Eleanor, if you want to go to the next slide. So I just wanted to start with a little background on Beacon. We're a relatively small city in the southwestern tip of Dutchess County. We have around 14,000 residents. That's been pretty stable over the last couple of censuses. Our demographics roughly mirror the United States overall. The city has a long history of environmental activism. Many of you have probably heard of Pete Seeger and Clearwater. And the city is Climate Smart Silver certified. And recently, earlier this year, passed one of the first 3 natural gas bans for new construction on appliances and other gas hookups in homes and some businesses. A few other prominent initiatives the city has taken on since I came aboard in the last 2 years have been looking really at where we can build out more solar generation infrastructure on the roofs of our buildings. We're starting to look at transitioning our fleet more towards electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles where we can, where it makes sense. We've recently worked with a couple committees that the city has to implement a very popular composting program that the municipality offers with a couple drop sites and then also subsidized bins. And we're in the process right now of rebuilding a centralized firehouse that will be entirely powered by geothermal energy. And something that I've been working on personally is putting in vehicle charging stations through grant programs. And in general, our city administrator, our mayor, and our council are all very focused on environmental considerations in basically all areas that we work in. And our community is very energized around those issues as well. We can move to the next slide. So unlike many of you, we actually did 2021 for our year that we were focusing our efforts on this go around. As I alluded to earlier, Eleanor and other staff worked on a 2019 inventory previously. And so that was a very useful comparison to look at and helped us kind of establish a trend, something to help guide Faye and I as we were kind of diving into making this ourselves this time and working with many others to get that done. But it was also, as Eleanor will probably touch on in a few minutes, it also served as a little bit of a challenge because the data didn't always line up quite as neatly as we were hoping it would between the 2 years. So that was an interesting challenge that we came across a couple of times. But in this year's inventory, we included data from scopes 1 and 2, as well as the employee commute and solid waste data. This is the first time that we used greenhouse in our 4 greenhouse gas inventories that we included methane emissions from a closed city landfill, which gave us a lot of emissions, and you'll see more about that in a minute as well. But it was, I think, a very useful thing to include because it, gives us a more holistic view of what the city has going on within our borders. That's it for that slide. This is just a breakdown of basically a summary of all of our emissions as we've calculated so far. And you'll see that the big chunks here come from the purple and the orange sections. Specifically, since the city owns and operates both a water and wastewater treatment plant, these facilities serve not only our own residents, but also some third parties. Parts of Fishkill also get served by our facilities, and they drive a lot of our emissions. And since we're still pretty early in the electrification transition of our vehicle fleet, we're still kind of evaluating which vehicles make most sense to switch over. You'll also see that our fleet is still giving us a good chunk of our emissions as well. And that's it for that slide.
Thanks, Ben. So this is a comparison of all of the inventories, the government operations greenhouse gas inventories that we have done. So we initially, the city contracted with ICLEI to do our 2012 and 2018 inventories for us. And so I helped ICLEI staff do those back in 2019. And then to show the full effects of our solar farm, I did another inventory in 2019 or actually in 2020 to do a 2019 inventory to show the full usage of the solar farm to get us Climate Smart Silver certified. So we had previously done 3 inventories, and this was our 4th. And as you can see, not much has really changed. It's kind of depressing in some ways because it feels like we've done so much over those since that time. You can see the transition to LED streetlights here. That was done in about 2015. And what's not included on this graph is the solar farm. We'll see that in the next slide. We had marked that as for information only here because it really, you know, we still have those buildings emission or those building energy usage. It's just offset by the solar farm. And then the other thing, our buildings, where is it? Our buildings have gone up and down. I think we had more buildings since 2012, but they have, those emissions have started to decrease. As Ben noted, we closed one of our firehouses, and we're building a brand new, or not brand new, we're retrofitting one. So these two graphs show the difference when you include those landfill emissions. This is a really depressing one. Landfill emissions are so crazy, right? These methane emissions, even though it closed in the 70s, it's still emitting so much. And I know other communities have the same thing. But also on this graph, you can see this is what, this is our scope 2 emissions once we take away once we add in the solar renewable generation. So it does decrease our scope 2 emissions significantly there. And this is everything marked as information only in ClearPath. So you could really see the difference there. Some notes on our emissions by sector. So I've already mentioned we closed that firehouse. That's why our buildings are a little bit less. Our vehicle fleet's very similar, even though we have 3 electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. Solid waste is the same data as previous inventories, except for that new landfill data. We did see a growth in our employee commute emissions, and that's because we've had a lot of new employees. I think we've added like 30 or 40 employees since the 2018, 2019 inventories. Streetlights, we must be missing some because it was higher after we converted our streetlights, but we're going to blame Central Hudson because we couldn't find we don't know why it's less. We don't have fewer streetlights. And the wastewater and water treatment, this is big and important emissions, and they're about to get bigger because we're in the process of converting our belt press to a centrifuge, which uses more energy, but should cut down on the sludge that's trucked out each week, which I just love this fact that sludge is trucked around the country. No, it's kind of gross. Challenges, as Ben alluded to, previous inventories were actually kind of a challenge because you're sort of comparing like where did we put this account in? What bucket did we put it in last time? It made things a challenge, and everyone kept asking me questions like, where did we do with this account? And I was like, I have no idea. It was 4 years ago. I have no recollection of where we put that single, traffic light account or something. The Central Hudson data, as I think everyone has said, was tricky. The 2021 data that they provided looked very different than even the 2019 data than they had sent us back then. And it's really, we have, I think, a pretty complicated data set. We have a lot of accounts, depending on how you're counting. And we even found a gas account for a traffic signal, which is a little ominous. So yes, and then we're gonna takeaways and learnings. The landfill emissions, they're a big bummer. That methane is there and it's being emitted each year, and there's not really much that can be done about it since it's been going on for so long. Ben already mentioned the electrification of the firehouse. That's one of our next steps. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to be beautiful. This is one of our electric vehicles right here. So a lot of good stuff happening and a lot more to do, I think. And thank you. I'm going to thank Rebecca Weinstein, the HVRC intern who helped Beacon, Marley Medard, our Climate Smart Fellow, Mary, Faye, the Beacon CAC, and I'll leave it to Ben to thank the city staff.
Yeah, obviously, I had a lot of people that I was pestering day to day to try and understand where things were lining up, when they weren't lining up, where things come from, who's in charge of what data. So I listed a couple of the main people that I worked with often and probably heard from me the most, but in general, all of our departments that were included in the inventory, they were all very willing to work with us. So thank you to everyone at the City of Beacon as well.
Thanks, Ben and Eleanor. That was great. And I, yet again, another big, somewhat overwhelming inventory. And I think worked through some great and interesting philosophical questions and technical and logistical questions. So thanks for that. And I wonder if anyone has any questions. If so, just, pipe right in. You don't need to raise your hand. Okay, well, I actually have a question. So I'll throw it up there because I think, and I've asked this to other presenters as well. is just, given the fact that so much of the data was so difficult to find or challenging with regard to knowing where to go and not having the processes in place, how do you think that you would help people trying to do this process, say a year from now or two years from now? Are there processes that you think are realistic to put in place that could help in making this easier moving forward and beyond just kind of putting the notes in ClearPath and sort of the usual things? Like what sorts of ideas have you had around how to improve this process moving forward? And I throw it out there to anyone who would like to answer. Yeah, go for it, Ben.
Okay. So one thing that I think Faye and I found really helpful was the fact that we did have the ability to, Eleanor acted like she didn't know the answers to a lot of things, but in reality, Eleanor was a great asset for this. And I think what I would encourage everyone who's doing these inventories as they're finalizing everything is leaving good notes. If you don't think that you'll be the one doing it the next time, kind of leaving a paper trail for people the next go around so they can figure out, because it is really helpful to have comparable data so you can kind of see what's improved over time, what's changed, what's gotten bigger, and make educated decisions with that. And I think that for us, we were very fortunate that we were able to bother Eleanor so much because she had kind of seen a lot of it before, where she found this, and she was very helpful. So I would say if you can leave notes for the future people who are going to be doing it, or even yourself, that would be really valuable, I think.
Yes, if we all had a secret weapon like Eleanor, it would be fantastic. All right. Well, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment, either Kelsey or Kristen, if you want to add to that.
I'm all set. I would honestly defer to Devin, as he had to kind of orchestrate all of the data collection.
Okay, Devin, you want to jump in? I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, you guys can hear me?
Yep.
I would say one thing that I realized, and for those who aren't aware, we had a little bit of a unique circumstance surrounding this project, in that we internally in the planning department experienced quite a bit of internal turnover right as this project was kicking off. So some of the folks who were leading up to this inventory, we've lost, and so they've retired and things like that. So in hindsight, what I would say is we, within the planning department, we did a lot of work kind of prepping, Jen and myself and our roles in this project, but we didn't really give a lot of thought on the amount of work it would take the others in the other departments, specifically in DPW. And so I think that if we were going to do this again next year or in a couple of years, not only putting it into our work programs, like, hey, in 2024, you're going to be spending a significant amount of time on a CAPI type project, but really building and setting the stage with those other folks in public works and in solid waste, getting it on their radar, getting it in their work programs, because so much of what we experienced was requesting data and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then because it's not a priority to them, right? It wasn't built into their work programs for the year, and they're understaffed and they don't have capacity. And then when we finally received the data, it's not exactly what we were looking for. So it's like trying to find that balance of like, do we go back and keep pushing, or do we just kind of make do with what we have? So I think having those conversations very early on, getting buy-in from others very early on, will hopefully help us moving forward. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, that's so true, so important, and a great point. So thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, given the tight time frame, I think we're going to have to move on now. But obviously, if there are more questions, either you can put them in chat for the individual presenters or reach out to them via email. But thank you again, all of you who presented today. Great job, and congratulations. And now we are going to move on to Caroline, who's going to walk us through emissions forecasting.
Great. Thanks, Mary. I'm just going to get my screen set up. Okay. Looks like you all should be able to see that. I'm going to zoom in a little bit too, assuming the text is smaller on your end. Okay, so I'm going to be showing how to complete a business as usual forecast in ClearPath's planning wizard tool. And so just a couple of things to note before I dive in. Before you start your forecast, you want to make sure your inventory is final and complete and that the QA/QC has been completed. And I note that because if you start to work on a forecast and you then realize you have to go back and make changes to your inventory, they are linked, but the changes that you make in your inventory will not automatically update in your forecast. So you'd have to create a new forecast or go in and do some manual adjustments and updates that could be a little bit more more work than needed. So just make sure your inventory is done and complete, and then you're good to go. Another thing I wanted to note is that the forecast the model I'm showing today can actually be done in both your local government operations side of ClearPath and community-wide. So I know some of you are starting to think about completing community-wide inventories, and you'll be able to use these same skills in the community-wide side as well. So that's kind of good news and exciting.
Hey, Caroline, sorry to interrupt. Can I just jump in for a second?
Of course.
I just want to say that the reason that Caroline is going through this today is because this will be really helpful for all of you to set targets that are realistic and to help in prioritizing high impact actions. And we're going to be asking each municipality to do this business as usual forecast as homework for the next meeting. So just want to put that all in context. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mary. Okay, so we are already in government operations track in ClearPath. So instead of going to inventories like you normally do, we're going to go to forecasts. And then scroll down, and there are actually two places where you can start your new forecast. You can use this start wizard in the gray box, or you can click new forecast at the bottom. They get you to the same place. We're just kind of advertising the new planning wizard up here. So we'll start with new forecast. And I like to name these my community name. So I'm just in a demo account. So I'm just going to say demo. Let's say that this is town of Poughkeepsie or Dutchess County. And then I like to signify that it is an LGO forecast. The end year of the forecast will all be doing 2030 forecast. You can do up to 2050 in ClearPath, I believe, but the 2030 is a good place to get you started and really think about the high impact actions we need to get done in the next few years. And then I like to name it BAU forecast as well. And you do want to use start values from inventory because that allows the forecast to pull directly from your inventory so that you don't have to manually enter them. And then another important thing to note is you want to make sure you are selecting the correct inventory. So some of you may have multiple inventories and you want to make sure you're selecting the 2019 inventory for this cohort. And then your end year, we're all going to be doing 2030. But again, like I said, you can certainly go in and go up to 2050 for future forecasts if you'd like to do so. All right. Hit save. And then scroll to the bottom. And I just wanted to, I did it through new forecast to show that this gets a little funky, but what's important to get into the wizard side of ClearPath is you find the right forecast and then you want to hit edit in wizard instead of edit records. The edit records is just the old planning tool that ClearPath has. And so wizard is much more user-friendly and easier to use and what I'm demonstrating. So that's how you get there. And good to just, double check that these are all right. It looks like they are. So now we can actually start creating our forecast. And maybe I'll pause for questions right now. Are there any general questions about what we're starting to do? Okay, for time's sake, I'm going to keep moving. So now we're going to create growth rates. So the growth rates are the rates that we're applying to our inventory and the inventory projections for years through 2030 that could impact emissions or activity data. So these are going to be things like the decarbonization of your electricity grid or population projections, that sort of thing. And I'll explain a little bit more as we start adding these. Yeah. So the first one we're going to add, and I am actually going to be using the numbers that you all will be using specifically for all of your forecasts. And some of them are going to be the same. A couple might be different between your municipalities, but most of them will be the same. So that makes it a lot easier. And Mary and I will be sending out all of this information so that you have the list of the data that you need to enter here. But so I am just going to call this grid decarbonization. And then the notes that I like to put in, and like we were just discussing, it's really important to add your notes with data gaps, assumptions, sources, so that people in the future know, what went into this record. So for this growth rate, I will be using, and you all will be using, the New York State's Clean Energy Standard, because this is a codified law saying that by 2030, New York State will have 70% clean energy. So yeah, so that's why all of us will be using this in this cohort for this forecast, because it's New York State law. So that is good news. And then I did go ahead and find for all of you to use from the same source, NYSERDA, in 2019, New York's electricity
was something on mine.
had 20% renewables in 2019. So those two numbers are key because those are what we're using to create the growth rate. So for grid decarbonization, we actually use, instead of percentage, I know this seems a little bit more backwards, but instead of percentage, we're going to use other, because the percentage type of growth rate in ClearPath is an annual percentage rate. And if you use other, it's much easier and more straightforward to just go from your 2019, which is your initial value. It says 2021 because I used a 2021 inventory for this, not to cause any confusion, but yeah, so you would be using your 2019 as your initial value, and then your end year value is 2030. So much easier than having to do 1% for every single year from 2019 to 2030. So for this, our initial value, we're starting with 80% non-renewables on the grid. So that's why we're going to be using 0.8. And again, we'll send this information to you later, but these are the actual values you'll be using. So our end value then is going to be 0.3 because we're ending up with just 30% non-renewables on the grid. And you can always add additional end year values. Say you're doing a 2050 forecast and you know that you're going to, end up at full, like 100% renewables. You would just hit add end year value, enter 2050, and you actually have to do 0.001. ClearPath is a little bit funky on that. It doesn't allow just 0, but yeah, that's just for future use of the tool. And so now that we have this filled out, we're going to hit save. And you can see it's updating in ClearPath already. I might go through all of the growth rates and then I'll pause for questions at the end, just for time's sake. So our next growth rate is going to be employee count projection. And this one can be used, this is used for more, like energy use. If you have more employees using a building, that could increase the amount of energies that is being consumed in the future. So that's why we want employee count projections. And we're going to pass out a little bit more information on how to get this number, but the example I'm using is definitely not what you'll be using, because your employee count projection will need to be specific to your community. But for the example I'm using, and this is from another community I've been working with, we just took the employee count data from past years, so 2005 to 2022, the annual employee count, and we used that to calculate an average annual change, which ended up being an increase of about 0.5% per year. And so by taking that, we were able to get an end year value. So for employee count projection, instead of percentage, we're going to actually be using total population. And so for this example, I'm just using a different kind of a random community's numbers, but let's say they started with total employees in 2019 was 2,191. And then that projection rate of 0.5% ended with 2,562 employees in 2030. And again, you can always add additional ones if you have a projection for 2025 or for beyond, you can just hit add and your value and do it that way. Okay, 2 more growth rates. So our third one is going to be population projection. And this one is actually, you will all be using this one. And you may actually, it depends on the emissions that you have in your local government operations. But if you are using this, you'll be using Dutchess County's population projection, unless you're able to get more locally relevant data. But in general, it seems like most of you will probably be using just Dutchess County population projections. So again, this is going to be the same as the employee count. So Dutchess County did provide us with this data, and they had 295,960 people in 2019. And by 2025, they are projecting almost 300,000. And then by 2030, even closer to 300,000. I guess it's all close to 300,000, but you get the idea. So, and I should note, so that the reason we're including this growth rate for your local government operations forecast is for any of you that have that had to account for emissions with a wastewater treatment plant that you own and operate, because that's servicing your whole community, not just your local government. Same with a solid waste facility. If you had to account for all of the emissions from the solid waste facility, that's servicing your community's population rather than just your government operations. And I'll be going into this a little bit more, but just that was to give you some background. Okay, and here's the last growth rate you will all be entering. And this one is actually just no growth, because some of you may think about it and realize, well, we don't expect to add any more streetlights by 2030. So you don't want to have a growth rate apply in that scenario. So for this one, I think the easiest way to do it is just to go to other again and start with an initial value of 1 and then end with a value of 1 as well, because that's just going to reflect no change. Okay, I just sort of blasted through growth rates. So now is a good time to ask questions related to these. Yeah, anyone have any questions?
Caroline, there's a question in chat from Eleanor. She's asking, what about eGrid and YUP has higher renewables than 20%?
Didn't you all use eGrid for, I missed this part. So did you use eGrid for the electricity emissions?
Yes, I was not able to find data on that, to be honest. And because we're using the clean energy goal from New York State, it's better to go with their data.
Okay, I'm just feeling my understanding is the New York Upstate Grid, which is our eGrid, has like 60% renewables right now, which is not what Central Hudson's mix is. But essentially, my understanding would be if we're using eGrid for these inventories, that our electricity emissions would already be using that really high 60% renewable rate in them. So I don't know how, if that would mess up if we're saying then the 20, we have 20% renewables in 20, initially, but we've actually shown that we have 60. I don't know how it would work.
Yeah, no, I've been trying to think through that too. And the reality is there aren't growth rates for eGrid values. So we might all need to think through this a little bit more. I was thinking that eGrid covers all of New York State, which is, or
No, yeah. There's like upstate, and then there's Westchester and New York City, and then there's a third Long Island one. And Westchester and the Long Island one are like super dirty. They're like 99% or like 95% fossil fuel.
yeah, yeah, well, let's look into this more. I've been I'll be honest, I've been super swamped lately, so I haven't had a ton of time to look into the grid decarbonization rate. But the clean energy standard is the best one to use, that 70%. Yeah. So we'll follow up and confirm what to use for that.
Thank you. I didn't mean it to be like a gotcha question. I was just curious.
Oh, no, you're good. I just wanted to be honest and say that I need more time to look into it, because I wasn't able to find data very easily on this in the last couple days, which, as you all know, is always a huge pain.
I've got a question about the population projections. You'd mentioned that is particularly important for those of us who have water or wastewater plants that are, serving a population. Should we figure in, I mean, I'm from a really small community, right? But so like change in population makes a big difference, even if it's a small number of people. And I know that there will be some housing developments, affordable housing developments that are going to come online that are maybe not technically within the perimeter of the village, but are going to tap into the water and wastewater treatment plants. Do you think I should add that population growth to my projection here?
Yeah, if any of you have more locally relevant data, then definitely use that. Mary and I, we were thinking through these in terms of what most of you will be using, and kind of assuming it'll be harder to get some of the data. But if you have that, definitely use that for your population projection. And the next step is to apply the growth rates, and it might be a little bit more clear how those are impacting your forecast as I go through the next step. So that's a good one to think about, Vanessa, for sure. And then another one I wanted to mention is if your community knows that you are building a whole new building or facility, you could also add a growth rate for commercial square footage increase as well. So yes, if you have more locally relevant data, please use it. And that's kind of on all of your ends to figure out where it would apply and what makes the most sense.
But will you still provide us with kind of the kind of generic Dutchess County growth rate?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So all of the numbers that I entered here are the ones that you'll be using, but we will send out as a follow-up to this session. Okay. Any other growth rate questions? And more might come up as I go through the next step, because I think the next step does clarify a lot around what they're actually being used for. Okay, I'm going to move on. So once you have all of your growth rates, and you can always go back in and add more once you, as you continue through the forecasting process, but once you have the ones that you are pretty sure you're going to be using, you can hit next. And we get to the apply growth rate section. Just one moment, I need to adjust something. Okay. Okay, perfect. So under apply growth rates, each of the sectors will appear in a gray box, and depending on your screen, it might be on the left side of the screen, but this is how you can navigate between the different sectors that you'll be applying your growth rates to. The exclamation marks are showing that your inventory has emissions in that sector, and so you should go to that sector and apply your growth rates there. It's just kind of a little reminder. So it automatically starts at the top in buildings and facilities. And just to orient yourselves a little bit, this is sort of the main part of the forecasting module. I kind of think of it as the calculator portion that you did in your inventory. So similarly, you need to name your record. You can name it whatever you want. I'm just doing an example. I like to name it by sector, so buildings and facilities. Another thing to note at the top, always make sure that official is marked, because this is, it's kind of like the information only checkbox. If it's not checked, it won't impact your forecast. And then down here is where we have inventory output. And so this is directly pulling information from your inventory. So all of the electricity from all of your buildings and facilities, as well as all the natural gas, will appear here. And then the starting values are also pulled from your inventory. So the quantity is, it's that activity data you entered in ClearPath. So it's all of the data you received from your sources and then entered into ClearPath. So for example, for electricity, this would be the kilowatt hours that you received from Central Hudson, and then you entered it. And that's what's associated with the emissions value that ClearPath calculated. And I also wanted to note that this doesn't usually happen, but if for some reason it does come up as one of these has a 0 in it, you can just go back into your inventory, find that number, and enter it here manually. That shouldn't happen, but if it does, just know that you can enter it manually. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to note, if for some reason a record from your inventory doesn't appear here, like say, for example, you have heating oil in one of your buildings and it's not appearing, you can go to this drop-down menu and scroll down to the fuel type. So residual fuel oil number 5, and then you can just manually enter what was in your inventory. So the quantity of the heating oil that was consumed by the building, and then the CO2e output that ClearPath gave you. Oops. Okay, and so now that's all the information you need to then select and apply your growth rates. So for electricity, for the quantity value, the growth rate here, that is going to be your employee count projection. And that's because the number of employees that are using your buildings and facilities are likely going to impact how much electricity is consumed or used by those buildings and facilities. And the same goes for natural gas. If there are more people there, yeah, you're just most likely consuming more energy. And then the CO2e for electricity, that's where the grid decarbonization rate comes in. So that's where you apply that. And yeah, I'll go through each of the sectors just so that you can get a sense of what thinking goes behind selecting growth rates. And I think once you start to think it through, it typically makes sense. But always let us know if you have questions. Let's see. Just checking my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, I don't think so. So once you fill this all out, make sure you hit save. And this is where it starts to get more fun. Your graph will start to fill out. So just based on employee count projections and the grid decarbonization, which we need to look into a little bit more, theoretically, your buildings and facilities will go down in emissions by 2030. And so it's also good to pause and look at this and make sure everything looks right, do kind of a gut check, that sort of thing, before moving on to the next sector. So we can move on to streetlights and traffic signals. And we're just going to do the exact same things. Name it, official. Oh, and I should have mentioned the last one. Always make sure you fill in notes for any gaps or assumptions, anything that a person in the future needs to know when looking at this forecast. Okay, and so for streetlights and traffic signals, this is one where, again, you're gonna need to think about what your community might look like by 2030. And let's say I know that there are no new streets, going in. There's no expectation for additional streetlights being added. So this is where I want to apply the no growth rate, because we're not going to be consuming more kilowatt hours of electricity. So I can assume there's no growth. And then again, for that CO2e carbon intensity factor, we're going to use the grid decarbonization. And hit save. And you can see it appearing, and it looks kind of a similar rate to the buildings and facilities because that grid decarbonization rate. So that's good. It looks like it's working. And then we can move on to our next one, which is vehicle fleet. And yeah, we're just going to go through it all the same pretty much. I'm just going to kind of speed through a lot of these because once you can do a couple, I think the rest makes sense, but I just want to make sure you all know what to think through for each sector. So for vehicle fleet, again, I think employee count projection makes the most sense because if you add more employees, your fleet might grow, more people doing more work at parks or, you know, wherever there might be more employees. That's a good growth rate to apply. And then this carbon intensity factor is different. You're going to be using this default transportation carbon intensity growth rate. So this is a US national default rate. The only other rate you might use here is if you have a locally relevant data set that can give you a transportation carbon intensity rate, but that's pretty uncommon. So I would assume you should just be using this default. And then we're just going to do the same for the rest of the records in vehicle fleet. And I mean, there's also a good point to think about. If you know that you are getting more employees, but you're not planning to buy any more small utility vehicles by 2030, you could put in no growth here. So thinking through those kinds of things is good to do, but as a default, you can always just use employee count projection. And then as you can see, it keeps on adding to your graph, which I find very satisfying. And so our next sector, I know this inventory doesn't have transit fleet. I don't think most of yours do. So we're going to jump ahead to employee commute. And this one is pretty straightforward. You might have a diesel one pop up, but for both gasoline or diesel employee commute, you'll do employee count projection again, and that default transportation CAPI standard. Okay, and so the inventory I worked on for this does not have solid waste facilities, so nothing will pop up. If yours does, just think through the growth rate that makes the most sense for your community for that. And I do have water and wastewater, so I can show that one. And so for this inventory, the local government does actually own their own wastewater facility. So in that case, I would use that total Dutchess County population projection, unless I have my own community's population projection, but either one works. I'm assuming I do not have access to my own community's population projection and using the Dutchess County one. Hit save. And that should be all of the sectors since all of the little exclamations have disappeared. And that, yeah, so that actually covers, actually, I'll jump ahead a little bit before, actually, yes, I will pause for questions here so that you can ask specific sector questions if you have any. Or I can keep going too.
Question about streetlights. If we switch to LED streetlights in 2022, is there a way that we can add that like as an event that would then show the the electricity for streetlights going down?
Yes, there will be. You are ahead of the curve, Vanessa, which is great. So this is just applying the growth rates to what we know now, but any action like that would actually, you could go under model reduction measures, which I will not be showing today because for some reason ClearPath unfortunately has a little bug in it right now that is not allowing me to show reduction measures actually impacting a forecast, which makes it a little bit hard to demonstrate for you all. So I'll speak more to our plan for that in a moment. But yes, Vanessa, there is a way to apply that to your forecast, which I will be showing at a later date, but you will start to think through in the coming weeks. Sorry, I could only half answer that at the moment.
No, thanks.
Okay, any other questions related to applying growth rates or the creation of growth rates? Okay, great. I'm going to keep moving. So one more thing you can do for your your business as usual or BAU forecast is you can add reduction goals so that they can appear in your graph. So one that you all might be using is the CLCPA targets that New York State has. So in 2030, the aim is for a 40% reduction, and in 2050, it's an 85% reduction in total overall emissions. So I already added these in the past, but all you do is hit add new goal, name it, put the year in and the percentage in. And it's up to you what goals you want to put here. You don't have to use these. You're welcome to use your own internal government goals or what you'd like to make a goal. These are just to show in the graph, which I will show you now what it looks like. So I'm going to skip step 5 for now. We'll get back to that later, and I might introduce a little bit on it in just a minute. Yeah, so I'm going to jump ahead to view results so that we can just focus on the business as usual forecast for now. And so I'm going to name it BAU forecast. Probably always good to enter the year 2030 BAU forecast. Be more specific just for tracking purposes. We hit create planning scenario. And again, this is where it gets a little more fun. So now you can actually see everything appearing in your graph, including these reduction goals. You can, download the image for your climate action plans when you are working on those. You could even include this in your inventory report if you really wanted to. Yeah, and there are ways, if you want to just focus on looking at one sector, you can deselect others. Yeah, so now it gives you a sense of, yeah, this is great for showing, how far you are from meeting the CLCPA goals. This community, if all these growth rates are, I don't know. I mean, this is one thing to note, this is a forecast. It's based on a lot of estimations, assumptions. It's not a super robust one. So it is just to give you a good idea of where to put actions and where to, where those high impact actions might be and how far off you are from meeting your goals. So it's really just a planning tool. Don't assume that your emissions will exactly look like this in, 7 years? But yeah, it is exciting to see that, if this community were to electrify all of their buildings and be on 100% renewable energy, they would meet the 2030 CLCPA goal. So that is it for business as usual forecasting. So I'll pause for questions.
Caroline, I might just add as well that this is not required for either the inventory report or the CAP, the Climate Action Plan. However, as mentioned, it's certainly very helpful for determining which high impact actions are realistic and should take priority to reach your goals. And this can also be, I know Caroline mentioned, it could be included in the inventory report, but obviously it could be also included in the Climate Action Plan.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. Okay. I'm assuming there are no other questions. Please come to office hours you might run into some as you're working through this and thinking about which growth rates to apply. So just let us know when you come to that point. Mary, do I have a few more minutes? Because I can introduce the reduction measures and talk about what they'll be doing the next few weeks.
Sure, yes.
Okay, so the other step in this tool is model reduction measures. And this is where you get to apply things like your LED retrofits to streetlights. And I'm not going to do an in-depth demonstration of what this looks like in ClearPath, but I wanted to note that I am currently creating and almost done with creating a sort of list of essentially the calculators or the measures that you'll be modeling or that you could model. You don't have to do this step, but it could be really useful. So we wanted to show it and allow you to use it for your climate action planning and your stakeholder engagement as well. So I just wanted to point out that in step 5, you don't have to start doing this yet since I'm not doing a full demonstration, but you are more than welcome to start going in here and exploring these reduction strategies. And I'm creating a worksheet that kind of goes along with these reduction strategies and helps you identify the data that you'll need for doing this portion of the forecasting and modeling reduction measures. So yeah, there's not a lot to show right now, but just to give you a sense, they look very similar to the calculators you did in your inventory, but you'll just be filling out filling these out, and I'll cover that more later, and you'll have a worksheet to help you think through the data that you'll need for that portion. I think that's all I really wanted to say, unless you have anything to add, Mary.
No, this was great, Caroline. Thank you so much. And there's definitely more to come. So yeah, this is a great introduction, and definitely the business as usual forecast is the first step, and we'll be putting together a worksheet which has the information you'll need to input here, as well as the sources of data for the Dutchess County forecast numbers. So hopefully you'll find that useful. Great. All right. Well, then I will jump in. Unless Kale, I don't know if you wanted to mention anything further.
No, nothing more to add, but great presentation.
Yep, absolutely. Great job, Caroline. All right, so I am going to talk a little bit about some of the questions that have come up, and also talk about homework for the next session, and hopefully give people an idea of kind of where we are and next steps, and then talk a little bit more about the engagement strategy. And I know we have a hard cutoff at 12, in part because HBRC is having a CEC event, which should be great if any of you are interested in doing a CEC campaign. I encourage you to attend that. I think Eleanor's going to put some information about that in the chat if you're interested in joining HBRC for that webinar at 12. All right, so let me share my screen here and we can jump right in. Okay, so I'm just going to breeze through these really quickly. They're very technical and they all have to do with the inventory report for those of you who haven't finished it yet. So there's some questions about finding your pie chart. I just want to be clear that the pie chart is in any of the main sector pages of ClearPath on the bottom right. So you can just click on the sector tab at the top and scroll to the bottom of the page to see the pie chart. I think the source of confusion is that it's not under the reports tab. I guess it's considered, such an important chart that it's included in all the sector tabs instead, but just be aware you will not find that in the reports tab. Some issues on formatting in the report template. I've found the easiest way to add new photos to the report or to switch out the boilerplate photos that are in the report is just to right click. Well, first copy the photo that you want to include in the template. So copy it to your clipboard, right click on the photo in the template and choose this change picture, and then say from clipboard, and it should just replace the old photo and maintain all of the formatting. And obviously this photo that I chose was not a good one because it is a horizontal photograph of Mohawk Mountain House, and I'm putting it in a vertical photo space. So you're missing the grandiose nature of the building. And so just keep that in mind when you're choosing photos. For the vertical photos, if you can try and find a vertical photo to stick in there, that's ideal. I think I emailed you all about these 2 tables that need to be included in the appendix of your report. So here are the numbers that will go into those tables. You can just copy and paste this directly into your report. You can also find this in the checklist I provided. And also that checklist lives on the CAPI website. So if you're interested, I do encourage you all to look at the checklist before finalizing your inventory report, just to make sure you've covered all the bases. And at that point, I'm happy to take a look at it myself. So in the report template under table 2, which is a summary of all of your findings, there is a breakout in several sectors. For instance, in buildings and facilities, they ask you to tally up electricity and natural gas. To do that, you're going to want to export the detailed report in the reports section of ClearPath. Once you have that data, you can pull it out and manually tally electricity usage and do the same for natural gas. So this is not a one-step process, just so you're aware. It does take a little time, but hopefully that should be pretty straightforward. What about the sectors we're not including? So for a lot of you, there's sectors that you didn't include, so you can just delete the row that is not relevant to your inventory. Also, just as a idea to consider, you can use the blue rows as total rows. So at the sort of towards the right side of the blue row, you can put a total and then just use that to tally up all the different emissions within that sector, and then write a line, the word total. Should I share my inventory with my town council or village board, and when? So I know I've mentioned this before, but I just want to mention it again. It's a great idea to bring your inventory results and your report to your town council or your village board. They're a key stakeholder in this climate action planning process. It will bring them up to speed on all the work you've been doing. And also it will hopefully reinforce the benefits of doing this work. If you can tie it to the work you're about to start with the climate action plan and how you're doing this as a cohort, I think it can be a powerful way to not only educate your local government, but also to get their buy-in as this process continues. I know, just a quick note on that, I know the presenters today spoke about the importance of educating stakeholders early in the process, and that hopefully the lessons learned from doing the inventory can apply to the climate action plan as well, because you're definitely going to need help and buy-in from different departments, and the earlier you plant that seed, I think, in this process, the better. And one great place to start is with the board or the town council. I want to create a chart without one of the sectors. How do I do that? So you can mark a record, a specific record as information only. And if you do that for all the records in the sector, then you can see the pie chart without that sector. So this doesn't mean the information goes away, it just is hidden. And then it's very easy if you decide when you decide you want to put it back into the inventory results, you just uncheck that information only box. Where should we put this inventory on our website? Ideally somewhere prominent. This is the Village of Rhinebeck's website, and they've already posted their inventory. And this is, I assume, where they're also post their draft climate action plan when they're ready to share it publicly in order to get feedback from the community before finalizing it. So it is important that that it's an easy to get to place on the village website. Not mandatory, but it will help. What are the CSC requirements for outreach and engagement? Okay, so now I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about outreach and engagement. The outreach and engagement component of the CSC action is an additional component, which we're going to be doing. It's worth 4 points. It shouldn't be too challenging, but it certainly involves some forethought. And because of that, I have put together a planning document, which I'm going to go over quickly, and hopefully that will help you with this process. So what are the requirements for outreach and engagement? First off, meeting with the key government department stakeholders is going to be really important. And that is a requirement not only for outreach and engagement, but for the general government operations climate action plan. So figuring out which departments you're going to want to meet with and thinking through, who should be at that meeting and when it should happen is important. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. You're also required to provide an opportunity for the public to review and comment on the draft climate action plan. So as I mentioned, if you, when your draft is complete, and hopefully, we're aiming for that to happen somewhere between the end of the year and the end of January, so that people have time to comment on that before you finalize the plan at the end of Q1. And then lastly, you're required to develop a communication and engagement strategy. So here is where hopefully this CAPI guidance document for public outreach and engagement planning will be helpful. And I'm going to jump into that and talk a little bit more about that. But before I do that, I just want to say, for those of you who still aren't clear about what is public outreach and engagement and what the plan is intended for use by local government staff and volunteers for creating the plan, and it's to help ensure success of public outreach and engagement as part of the larger CAP process. Okay, so I'm going to jump into that quickly before I go over the homework for next time, just to make sure that we are all clear on what that means. But I'm just going to stop sharing for a second while I pull that up, and this is probably a good time to see if there are any questions. No. Okay. All right. Well, then I will go right back and share my screen again and talk about this guidance for public outreach and engagement. So this is a document that that I have created with the help of ICLEI, and it hopefully will give you some guidance in thinking through outreach for this plan. And following this meeting, I'm going to post it to the CAPI website under program resources, so you'll be able to find it there. And it is part of your homework for the next session to create a draft plan here. So basically just filling out this document. So the first page here is just the directions and background and introduction and guidance for the plan. And then on page 2, the plan itself starts. Basically naming the plan is important, and talking about the goals and objectives of the plan. All the text you find here in italics is draft text. So, please feel free to edit it as needed and replace it if you want to write something totally different. Okay, and there's also a link here to the CSC Inclusive Community Engagement Primer, which I recommend you all read. The requirements for a government operations climate action plan for outreach and engagement is much smaller than for a community plan, but in any case, this is worth reading. This community engagement primer, it will give you some great ideas on how to connect with the community, not only for this plan, but for other plans moving forward, as well as for reaching disadvantaged communities. Okay, so for this CAP outreach, you should appoint an outreach lead from your team. This can be someone on your CAPI team, or if you want to pull someone else in to help with outreach and to be the lead, obviously you can do that as well. Here you provide the member of the CAP outreach team. Again, this can be just your CAPI team, or if you want to think about other people who might be good to include in this outreach component, this is where, you know, you just put their names down and reach out to them to ensure that they're interested. Maybe people who have trusted connections to key stakeholder groups might be good to involve. So these below, the outreach components, are mostly optional, with the exception of the first two. So the first one here, A, is stakeholders. So you are required to meet with stakeholder groups within the government. So, you know, this is also really important for planting that seed. What we all talked about earlier was kind of a lesson learned from the inventory, right? Reaching out to key stakeholders early in the process, informing them of the results of your inventory, what you've learned, the analysis, and what you'll be doing moving forward in terms of the climate action plan. So here are some potential groups you might want to meet with. You don't have to meet with all of them. You might want to call one meeting and invite them all to one meeting. And just of note, it will be recommended that after you create the draft plan that you also meet with them again. You might want to make a different person responsible for each of these groups, if that makes sense. You can put here the date or the date range in the beginning with regard to when you think you want to meet with them, or when you think it's realistic to meet with them. And then once you've had the meeting, you can mark it as completed. The municipal website, as mentioned, it is required that you post your draft CAP to the municipal website. And here's where you think about the dates for doing that. You know, this is obviously a little bit early. Although if you're ready, you can first post a high-level deck, which explains the results of the inventory and maybe talks a little bit about climate action planning. We can talk about that more in subsequent meetings if you want to do that. And then posting a draft version of the CAP. This would probably be a little bit later, probably, you know, in December, January timeframe. And then the final CAP, we hope, you know, sort of in the February, March timeframe. So that gives you a general sense of timing. And again, the rest of these are optional, but if you did want to plan, for instance, a workshop or a community event to just bring the public up to date with what you're doing, then here's where you would think about those kinds of things. For instance, you might want to table at the farmer's market or at a school event. If you're doing other things for the community, you could, you know, tag along and include the CAP as something that people could find information for at these events. You might want to include it in an email or a mailing, a mayor's message, or a CAC newsletter, for instance. And again, thinking through the dates here, I think early on will give you more flexibility in terms of what you do and when you do it. Internet, press, social media, you might want to think about posting to your Instagram account or Twitter, Facebook. Informational flyers are always helpful. I think I shared one from the Village of Pelham that that they've done around CAPI and the greenhouse gas inventory that you can feel free to leverage or create your own if you decide to do so. And then partner groups, if you are interested in partnering with any of the local government agencies, thinking about or committees or councils, this is a good time to think about who those people would be, or which groups, and when you would want to meet with them. Yeah, and then the CSC program does require documentation. So if you do any of these things I've just mentioned, it's important to document them through either photos or attendance lists, meeting presentations, or any press coverage of events, and including that in your documentation. That will be an additional document that you'll include when you submit for CSE to get those extra 4 points. But again, it doesn't need to be anything too comprehensive, just again, coverage of and documentation of the events that you have completed. All right, does anyone have any questions on that before I go back to our homework for the next meeting? No. All right, well then I will.
Mary, I have a question.
Oh, sure, Devin.
So with a little bit of tweaking
Mm-hmm.
and obviously having to go through, like for us at the county, our legislature, could this engagement strategy be used for the mitigation component of the climate change education and engagement, climate smart community action? It seems like it's a strategy, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
can we
Yeah,
use that?
I'd have to look at the requirements for that action more specifically, but probably is my vague answer. It could also be used for the community greenhouse gas inventory, sorry, the community climate action plan. So definitely feel free to leverage it for whatever you want. I think, you know, it's pretty vague, but helpful in terms of planning those outreach strategies.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That's a good point. All right, I will jump back into the homework now, unless there are any more questions. Okay, I do see that Eleanor has also posted the 12 o'clock Zoom link if any of you would like to join the CEC meeting. Okay, so homework for next week. So if you could review and complete a draft of the stakeholder engagement plan that that I just went over, that would be great. Obviously, please feel free to send me any questions you might have, or come to office hours, 10 a.m. on Tuesdays. Always a great time to reach myself, Caroline, and Kel. I would encourage you to at least schedule a meeting or try and get on the agenda for your village board or town council, or meet with them. If you have finished your inventory, all of you have finished your inventory now at this point, which is so exciting and fantastic. Congratulations, everyone. You could meet with your local municipality at this point, or if you want to wait and finish your report first and then meet with them, you know, that's fine as well. I think sometimes it does take a while to get onto the agenda, so you might want to just think about you know, that in terms of the timing of when you meet with them, because it would be good to do that you know, in the next couple of months. The business as usual forecasting video. This is a video with Hannah, who was helping out, as you know, when Caroline was away. It reviews the same material that Caroline just went over today. So if you haven't already watched it, I would definitely encourage it. It's 17 minutes, and I will provide the link in a follow-up email. And also it's on the CAPI website, but definitely it will help to answer any questions that you have as you do your business as usual forecast. And obviously the main item here is to actually do that forecast, and I didn't include that here for some reason, but if you could please do your business as usual forecast for the next meeting, that would be great as well. And feel free again to come to office hours and reach out if you have questions. And obviously, lastly, if you haven't finished your inventory report, please do so and notify us when you're done. Our next meeting will be September 20th from 10 to 12. That will also be virtual, and we'll talk more about getting to realistic goals. We'll go over the modifications to the emissions targets that Caroline mentioned today. And once the ICLEI tool is working again, we can really, you know, delve into that in greater detail to set goals that take into consideration some of the high impact actions that you're considering, and any changes that you've made to your emissions from 2019 and moving forward. We'll also talk a little more about outreach and engagement. And then lastly, on October 18th, we did hear from you and listen from the survey feedback that you want to have more in-person meetings. So we're going to have the October 18th meeting in person in Millbrook. So thank you to Kelsey, and Cornell Cooperative and the county for, again, letting us use that great facility in Millbrook. And we will look forward to seeing you there. And that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm sure Caroline would be as well. But we did want to give you, those of you who are attending the 12 o'clock CEC event, a little time, a little bathroom break before that meeting. So it doesn't look like there are any more questions. Unless, nope, no hands. All right, well then that's it for today. Thank you all so much. Thanks again to our presenters. Congratulations everyone for being done with your inventories in ClearPath. And I look forward to seeing you all in September, if not sooner.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.